Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the absolute worst, most back-breaking, stomach-turning jobs in all of history. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the gentle sounds of a medieval village at dusk, the distant lowing of a cow, the clatter of a blacksmith's hammer finally falling silent, the first few chirps of crickets settling in for the night. You're standing by a slow-moving, murky river, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something a little swampy. This isn't a beautiful, serene scene, though you're here for a job, a truly miserable job. Your boots are already caked in mud, and a mosquito just found a perfect landing spot on your cheek. Now, take a deep breath. You'll notice the distinct, earthy smell of the fenland, the cool, wet air on your skin. You feel a pull on your hand, a heavy, squirming sack. This isn't a sack of grain, or coins, or anything nice. It's a sack full of writhing, blood-sucking leeches you just harvested. This is your reality tonight, a reality where you probably wouldn't survive a week, let alone a lifetime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are and what time it is for you in the comments, and we can all share a moment of quiet connection across the miles. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the slimy weight of the leeches, a cool, shifting mass against your palm. You are a leech collector, and your office is this foul, muddy swamp. Your tools are simple, a pair of old, torn trousers and an unshakable tolerance for discomfort. The job is disturbingly straightforward. You simply wade into the stagnant water, sometimes with a horse, and let the leeches attach themselves to you. Yes, you heard that right. You are the bait. The leeches, hungry for blood, latch onto your legs and arms, swelling as they feed. It's a job that required a peculiar blend of desperation and stoicism. You'd stand there for hours, the cool mud seeping into your worn leather boots, as the tiny parasites worked their way up your skin. The itching must have been unbearable, a constant, irritating distraction from the biting flies and the sheer boredom of the task. Once they were plump and ready, you'd carefully scrape them off into your sack. This was a vital, if gross, service. Leeching was a mainstream medical practice for centuries, based on the theory of humorism, the idea that diseases were caused by an imbalance of the four bodily fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. It was believed that letting blood would restore balance and cure a host of ailments, from headaches to fever. But the leech collector's life was more than just being a human buffet. There were constant threats, from the obvious risk of infection from all those tiny puncture wounds, to more mundane dangers like slipping in the muck and being dragged under, not to mention the risk of contracting blood-borne illnesses, or the sheer misery of constant, low-grade discomfort. One fringe tidbit, a rather disturbing one, is that if a leech was particularly stubborn, collectors would sometimes use a pinch of salt to make it detach. This could, however, cause the leech to regurgitate some of the collected blood back into the wound, which you can imagine had its own set of risks. Historians still argue whether the demand for leeches was ever high enough to truly sustain a professional class of collectors, or if it was simply a desperate, part-time pursuit for the truly destitute. Regardless, the image of someone wading knee-deep in a swamp, their legs covered in feeding leeches, is a perfect starting point for our tour of terrible jobs. It's a testament to how far people would go to earn a few coins, and a visceral reminder of how different life was back then. Tonight, we will explore many more such jobs, each one more fascinatingly dreadful than the last. So just relax, let the image of that murky water fade, and get ready for your next grim assignment. You've made it out of the swamp, the phantom itch of 1,000 tiny bites still clinging to your legs. Now, let's trade the open air of the fenland for something far more confined and, somehow, even more putrid. The air shifts from damp and muddy to heavy and sickeningly sweet. You find yourself in the back alleys of a medieval town, the kind of place where the sunlight struggles to reach the cobblestones. And the smells are, well, let's just say they're an adventure in and of themselves. You carry a short, stubby shovel and a bucket. But this isn't for gardening. This is for something much, much worse. Your job: Gong Farmer. The name sounds a little whimsical, doesn't it? Like you're tending to some kind of celestial instrument farm. The reality is far from it. A gong was the medieval term for a privy, or toilet, and a gong farmer's job was to empty the cesspits of these privies. Cesspits were essentially deep holes dug beneath a house or a castle tower, lined with brick or stone, and they served as the building's waste disposal system. There were no flushing toilets, no septic systems, no modern amenities. Just a hole in the ground that filled up over time, and when it filled, someone had to go down there and scoop it all out. That someone was you. The work could only be done at night, which was a royal decree to minimize the public's exposure to the horrendous smell. You would descend into the pit, often using a rope or a flimsy ladder, and begin the horrifying process of shoveling the contents into your buckets. The stench must have been indescribable, a thick, suffocating wall of foulness. We're not just talking human waste here, either. Cesspits were often the repository for all sorts of household garbage, from food scraps to dead animals, so the concoction you were standing in was a truly revolting stew of decay. The job was not only disgusting, it was also incredibly dangerous. Methane and other toxic gases would build up in these confined spaces, and one whiff could knock you out cold. If you were unlucky enough to light a candle to see what you were doing, a spark could cause a massive and deadly explosion. A mainstream historical fact is that the gong farmer was one of the few professions that required a license, and it came with a surprisingly high wage because, well, no one else wanted the job. This high pay was a small consolation for the constant risk of suffocation, disease, and the social stigma that came with the job. A quirky tidbit is that the name Gong Farmer may have been a pun on the Middle English word gan, meaning to go, as in to go to the privy, or perhaps it came from the idea of the gong farmer going to the gong, or toilet. The exact etymology is a fringe, scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the high wages were a true reflection of the job's danger, or simply a form of hazard pay for a task that was seen as socially abhorrent. You emerge from the pit hours later, covered in, well, everything. The cool night air hits your face, but it does little to alleviate the overwhelming stench that has become a part of you. You might try to wash, but the smell and the memory of the work will linger for days, a constant, unwanted companion. You carry the buckets of waste to a designated dumping ground outside the city walls. The weight of them a dull, constant ache in your arms. This isn't just a job, it's a form of human endurance, a physical and psychological test that few today could ever imagine passing. So, as you drift to sleep tonight, be grateful for the small luxuries we have, like a toilet that flushes, and a job that doesn't require you to wade through the refuse of an entire town. You're finally free from the stench of the cesspit, but your nose doesn't quite get a break. The medieval town air is a constant barrage of peculiar smells. Now, your journey takes you to the Roman Empire, a place of grand aqueducts and very questionable laundry methods. You are a fuller, and your job is to clean and process wool cloth. This sounds innocent enough, a bit like a medieval laundromat operator. But the reality is far more stomach-churning. The most important ingredient for this process was, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this, human urine, the ammonia in urine. It turns out, is a fantastic cleaning agent, so your day begins not with soap, but with a collection bucket. You'd wander through the streets of Rome, collecting the contents of public and private toilets. This urine, known as fuller's earth, a name that, oddly, has nothing to do with soil but rather with the fullers themselves, was then poured into large vats. This is where your physical labour comes in. You, and your fellow fullers, would strip down and step into these vats of urine. The raw wool cloth was submerged, and then you would spend hours stomping and squishing it with your feet. You are quite literally dancing in pee. The action of your feet, combined with the powerful ammonia, helped to break down the dirt and grease in the wool. It was a messy, odorous, and absolutely essential part of the textile industry. Imagine the feeling of the warm, foul liquid sloshing around your ankles, the smell so strong it made your eyes water, and the constant, monotonous rhythm of stomping. The job was so well known that it was a common trope in Roman life. A mainstream historical fact is that fullers' shops were a significant part of the Roman economy. They were often located near public latrines or in residential areas where they could easily collect the raw material for their trade. A quirky tidbit is that urine was so valuable to the fulling trade that the Roman Emperor Vespasian famously imposed a tax on its collection, a tax known as the vectigal urinae, when his son, Titus, complained about the disgusting nature of the tax. Vespasian held up a gold coin and quipped, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't smell. This became a famous Latin proverb, and it shows you just how ingrained this peculiar practice was in Roman society. Historians still argue whether the fullers truly understood the chemical properties of ammonia or if they simply discovered its effectiveness through centuries of trial and error. Relying on tradition rather than scientific knowledge, your feet ache from the constant work, and the smell of ammonia has seeped into your skin and clothes. The cloth, once you've pulled it from the vat, is indeed cleaner, but the job is far from over. It still needs to be rinsed and dried, a process that might make you nostalgic for the simpler, albeit slimier, work of the leech collector as you drift off. Let your mind wander to the Romans, a people of such great innovation, and yet they were perfectly content to have someone stomp around in vats of human waste to get their laundry done. It just goes to show you that some problems were solved in the most unglamorous of ways. You've left the vats of urine behind and are now in a new, equally grim, professional setting. The smell is no longer putrid but coppery and antiseptic, mixed with the acrid scent of burning herbs. You are a medieval barber surgeon, a man or woman of many hats, most of them stained with, well, let's just say, a variety of unpleasant bodily fluids. A barber surgeon was an interesting hybrid role. Barbers, with their sharp razors and steady hands, were the natural choice for minor medical procedures. You didn't just give a haircut and a shave, you were the local medical practitioner, a general practitioner of a very different and much more gruesome kind. Your day is a constant series of small, agonizing dramas. A man comes in with a festering boil, and you're expected to lance it. A woman has a deep gash on her arm, and you'll use a needle and thread to sew it up. The patient's face contorted in pain, but your specialty, the one that makes everyone in town dread your services, is tooth extraction. There are no dentists, no Novocaine, and no gentle drilling. There's just you, a chair, and a pair of rusty, intimidating pliers. The patient, a poor farmer named Thomas, sits down, clutching the arms of the chair so hard his knuckles are white. He has a toothache that has kept him awake for a week. You inspect the offending molar, a dark, rotten thing that looks like a small stone. Your tools are simple but effective. You have the pliers, maybe a small wedge to hold the jaw open, and a bottle of wine, not for sterilizing the tools, but to numb the patient's senses a little bit, or at least make them care less about what's about to happen. You lean in, the smell of his sour breath filling your nostrils. With a firm hand, you get a grip on the tooth. Then, with a series of hard, twisting pulls, you get to work. The sound of the tooth cracking, the squelch of it coming loose, is something you'll never forget. Thomas screams, a sound that quickly turns into a groan of relief as you hold the bloody molar triumphantly aloft. The whole process takes a few agonizing minutes, and the risk of infection afterward is incredibly high. A mainstream historical fact is that the barber surgeon's profession was so well established that it had its own guild, and it wasn't until the 18th century that medicine and surgery were formally separated. The iconic red and white barber's pole is a direct reference to this era. The red stripe symbolizes blood, and the white stripe represents the bandages used to dress wounds. A quirky tidbit is that barbers sometimes treated blindness with a needle, pushing it through the iris to the back of the eye to dislodge cataracts, a procedure that sounds terrifying and was, of course, a hit-or-miss affair. Historians still argue whether the barber surgeon's practices were more harmful than helpful, or if the sheer number of procedures they performed meant they did. On average, more good than harm for the general populace. The lack of sanitation and medical knowledge meant that even a simple procedure like a tooth extraction could be a life-or-death situation. As you clean your pliers, another patient walks in. This time, a man with a broken arm from a fall off his horse. Your day is far from over. You'll be setting bones, lancing boils, and maybe even amputating a finger or two before the sun sets. as the quiet darkness settles in. Be grateful for the modern marvels of dentistry and medicine. Your sleep will be a lot more peaceful without the phantom screams of a man having his tooth pulled echoing in your mind. The lingering scent of blood and antiseptic from the barber surgeon's shop gives way to a new, more sinister odour. It's a smell of disease, of decay, of something utterly and deeply wrong. The year is 1348, and the world is in the grip of the bubonic plague, the Black Death. You are a plague doctor, and your uniform is one of the most iconic and unsettling images from history. You stand in the street, the bell-like echo of a death toll still hanging in the air. The street is eerily quiet, save for the occasional moan from behind a closed door. You pull on your leather gloves and adjust the dark, heavy wool coat that covers you from neck to ankle, but the most striking piece of your attire is your mask. It is a terrifying, beak-like apparatus, with glass eye coverings and a long, curved snout. Inside the beak, you've stuffed aromatic herbs, thyme, mint, rose petals, in the false hope that the strong, pleasant smells will ward off the miasma, the foul air believed to carry the disease. Your job is not to cure. Your job is to observe, to document, and to offer some small, futile comfort. You are a professional witness to death on an industrial scale. You walk into a house where an entire family lies stricken. You inspect the telltale buboes, the swollen, black lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, and neck. You use a long stick to prod at the bodies, to avoid any direct contact. You make a note in your book, tallying the dead, the dying, and the seemingly unaffected. You might prescribe a few remedies. Bloodletting with leeches. Remember our friend the leech collector? Applying a poultice of crushed herbs and goat dung to the buboes, or simply recommending prayer. A mainstream historical fact is that these doctors were often not formally trained physicians. They were often second-rate doctors or even complete novices hired by the cities to deal with the overwhelming medical crisis. They were paid with public funds, which was often a significant expense for the already strained city governments. The beak mask, a quirky tidbit of history, was not just for show. The herbs were meant to filter the bad air and protect the doctor. The heavy coat and gloves were a primitive attempt at personal protective equipment, although they were no match for the true vectors of the disease, fleas. Historians still argue whether the plague doctor's presence was a source of reassurance for the terrified populace, or if they were seen as grim harbingers of doom. Their silent, beaked figures a sure sign that death was near. Their lack of success meant that their reputation was not always a good one, and many were seen as opportunistic charlatans. You make your rounds, day after day, a silent, macabre figure moving through a city in mourning. The sight of you sends chills down the spines of the few people you pass in the street. You are a symbol of a time when the world was helpless against a silent, invisible enemy. As you close your ledger for the day, the final tally a number you are starting to lose the horror for. You can't help but think about the sheer futility of your task. All you are doing is counting the dead. There is no cure, only a slow march toward the grave for everyone you visit. You remove your mask, the smell of death and disease clinging to the leather, and you breathe in the cool, clean night air. You are a survivor, for now. But the knowledge of what you've seen will live in your mind forever. You've left the grim reality of the plague behind. And now you find yourself in the heart of ancient Rome, a place of power, politics, and brutal public spectacle. The air is electric with anticipation. The roar of the crowd a low, constant thrumming sound. You are not a gladiator, not an emperor, and not a senator. You are the Roman public executioner, a man whose face is known throughout the city and is met with a mix of fear and morbid fascination. Your job is to carry out the state's ultimate punishment, to perform death with a sense of ceremony and finality. You are the final act in a public drama, a role that required both a strong stomach and a certain flair for the theatrical. Your arena is not the Colosseum, but a public square where a crowd has gathered, a sea of faces eager for the spectacle. The condemned man is a traitor, or a thief, or perhaps a Christian refusing to renounce his faith. He is brought forth, and your presence is the final confirmation of his fate. You are a professional, and you take pride in your work, in the clean, swift finality of your sword or axe. A mainstream historical fact is that public executions were not just a form of punishment, they were also a form of entertainment and a powerful tool of political control. They served as a stark, public reminder of the consequences of challenging the authority of the Roman state. The crowd's reaction, their cheers and jeers, was an integral part of the spectacle. Your day is a strange mix of the mundane and the macabre. You must prepare your tools, keep them sharp and ready. You must wait for the right moment, for the order from the magistrate. You must perform the act with no hesitation, no sign of emotion. The job required an emotional detachment that few could master, but there were times when the executions were more elaborate, more gruesome, designed to send a specific message. Perhaps you would be required to crucify a man, a slow, agonizing process that was a testament to the cruelty of the Roman state. A quirky tidbit is that Roman executioners, known as carnifex, were often social outcasts. They were forbidden from living within the city walls and were seen as unclean. Despite performing a state-sanctioned role, they occupied a strange liminal space, feared and despised, yet a vital part of the Roman justice system. Historians still argue whether the carnifex was truly seen as a social pariah, or if their isolation was a necessary part of the job, a way to separate the man from the brutal acts he was required to perform for the state. The crowd disperses as the sun begins to set. The silence of the square a stark contrast to the noise of the day. You are left alone with the aftermath, the grim evidence of your work. You are a necessary evil, a man who lives in the shadows, a witness to the final moments of countless lives. As you walk home, you are keenly aware of the space people make for you in the street, the way they avert their eyes, and the silence that follows you. It's a lonely life, but it is a living. As you settle in for the night, be grateful that justice, however flawed, is now carried out with a little more privacy and a lot less public fanfare. The taste of blood has faded, but a new, more unsettling sensation takes its place, the cool dampness of a freshly dug grave. The setting is 19th century London, a city of gas lamps and fog, but also of poverty and a burgeoning medical science that demanded one thing above all else: cadavers for dissection. This is the era of the resurrectionist, and your job is to rob graves. In a time when the law only allowed medical schools to use the bodies of executed criminals for anatomical study, the supply simply couldn't keep up with the demand. A macabre black market was born, and you, a resurrectionist, are one of its primary suppliers. It's a moonless night, and you're in a quiet churchyard with your partner, a man named William Burke, or perhaps William Hare. If you were a famous resurrectionist in Edinburgh, you have a shovel, a pickaxe, and a keen sense of timing. The recent burial is your target. You approach the grave not by digging up the whole thing. That would take too long and make too much noise. A mainstream historical fact is that resurrectionists were also known as body snatchers, and they developed a set of clever techniques to get the job done quickly and quietly. You carefully dig a hole at the head of the grave, just large enough for you to reach the coffin, using a rope and some well-placed leverage. You break open the coffin lid at the top. You then use the rope to pull the body out of the coffin and through the narrow opening you've created. You leave the coffin and its contents behind, carefully replacing the soil and the headstone so that the grave looks undisturbed. This was a crucial part of the job. A quirky tidbit is that resurrectionists weren't stealing the coffins, because those were the property of the family, and stealing them would have been a felony punishable by death. The body, however, had no legal standing once they were buried, and so the act of stealing them was a much lesser crime. This legal loophole, a fringe tidbit of its own, was a key factor in the trade. Historians still argue whether the resurrectionists were simply amoral opportunists, or if they saw themselves as fulfilling a vital role in the advancement of medical science. Even if the methods were horrific, the gruesome nature of the work, and the constant fear of being caught by a patrolling watchman, made it a high-risk, high-reward profession. You wrap the body in a sack, hoist it over your shoulder, and make your way back to the city under the cover of darkness. The medical school pays you a handsome price, perhaps enough to keep you fed for a few weeks, and the doctors are grateful for the fresh specimen. The bodies you provide are the only way for anatomy students to learn, and so, in a twisted way, you are a crucial part of the medical profession. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that cold, silent churchyard and the unsettling weight of the body on your back will linger. Sleep might be hard to come by, but the coins in your pocket are a grim comfort. You've left the macabre world of grave robbing behind, trading the silent churchyard for the noisy, bustling, and yes, still incredibly smelly streets of a medieval town. The setting is one of close-packed houses, narrow alleys, and a constant, low-level scuttling sound that is not. You realize with a shiver, just the wind. You are a rat catcher, a grim and necessary profession in an age when vermin were a constant threat, both to food supplies and to public health. This isn't a whimsical job like in a children's story. It is a serious, dangerous, and utterly disgusting daily grind. Your tools are simple and brutal: a handful of traps, a small sack to hold your catch, and perhaps a stick or a terrier dog to help with the hunt. You work the back alleys, the markets, and the dark corners of warehouses and taverns. The rats are everywhere. And they are not the small, timid creatures of modern imagination. They are bold, disease-ridden, and often aggressive. A mainstream historical fact is that the rat catcher was a vital profession, especially in urban areas, where rat populations could explode. These animals carried fleas and diseases, most notably the bubonic plague, and were responsible for destroying vast amounts of grain and other food stores. Your senses are your best allies. You listen for the telltale squeaks and scurrying sounds behind walls and beneath floorboards. You use your stick to probe dark corners, and you're always ready to move quickly. The job is a constant game of hide and seek, a battle of wits against a clever and numerous enemy. You might lay out a few traps, but your main method is often more direct. You get your hands dirty. A quirky tidbit is that medieval rat catchers often sold the rat tails they collected as proof of their work, or even as a strange kind of novelty. The more tails you had, the more effective you were seen to be. This, of course, led to a fringe market in rat tails, with some unscrupulous characters even breeding rats just for their tails. Historians still argue whether the rat catcher was truly effective in controlling the rat population, or if they were merely a symbolic service, a way for city leaders to show they were doing something about the problem. The sheer number of rats, especially during a famine or a plague, was often too great for any one person or even a small team to manage. You finish your day's work, your sack heavier than you'd like, and the thought of the diseases you could have contracted from a single scratch or bite weighs on your mind. You are a dirty, unappreciated part of the urban ecosystem, a guardian against a silent, unseen enemy. You might sell your catch to a medical school for anatomical study or for use in crude herbal remedies. A strange, circular economy of sorts. As you wash your hands, the lingering stench of rat musk and grime clings to your skin. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, you'll be grateful for a world with modern pest control, a world where the scuttling in the walls is a rare, rather than constant, sound. You've escaped the squeaks and scuttling of the rat catcher's world, but now a new sound fills your ears, the thunderous boom of cannons and the sharp crack of muskets. You're no longer on land, but at sea, a place of wood, water, and sudden, violent death. The year is 1588, and the English fleet is facing the Spanish Armada. You have one of the most terrifying jobs imaginable. You are a fireship pilot. Your vessel is not a warship, but a floating bomb, a single-use weapon designed to sow chaos and destruction among the enemy fleet. The ship you command is an old, decrepit hulk, stripped of its sails and rigging, its decks and holds packed with flammable materials, tar, gunpowder, pitch, and kindling. Your mission is simple, but deadly. You must steer this floating inferno toward the heart of the enemy formation, get as close as you can, and then, at the last possible moment, light the fuses and escape in a small boat. The job requires an almost suicidal bravery and an incredible sense of timing. A mainstream historical fact is that the use of fireships was a key tactic in the English victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588. Sir Francis Drake famously used them to break the Spanish formation at the Battle of Gravelines, forcing the Armada to scatter and making them vulnerable to attack. You feel the adrenaline coursing through your veins as you steer your ship toward the massive, multi-decked Spanish galleons. The air is thick with the smell of salt and gunpowder. The Spanish cannons fire, their shots whistling past your ears and splashing into the water. You know that if a single one hits your cargo, you'll be vaporized in a flash of fire and smoke. A quirky tidbit is that the Spanish, despite their vast naval superiority, were terrified of the fire ships. They were seen as a sort of dark magic or a cowardly act of war, and the psychological impact they had on the Spanish sailors was arguably more effective than the physical damage they caused. Historians still argue whether the fire ships were a true tactical masterstroke or a desperate gamble that just happened to work out. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward, breaking the enemy's formation and demoralizing their sailors, was even greater. You get close. So close you can hear the shouts of the Spanish sailors on deck. You light the fuse. A small, hissing sound in the midst of the chaos. The fire quickly takes hold, and the ship becomes a roaring inferno. You jump into your small escape boat and row furiously away. The heat of the fire ship on your back, you watch as your former vessel crashes into a Spanish galleon. The explosion, a deafening roar that sends splintered wood and flaming debris into the air. The mission is a success, but the cost is immeasurable. The job of a fire ship pilot was a one-way ticket to either glory or a fiery death. You are one of the lucky ones, but the memory of that heat and that sound will stay with you forever as you finally drift off to sleep. Let the distant sound of waves lull you into a peaceful rest. A stark contrast to the thunder of cannons and the roar of fire. You've made it back to land. But you're not out of the woods just yet. The smell of gunpowder and salt gives way to something far more visceral and pervasive. It's a smell that clings to the air, a mix of rot, decay, and something acrid and chemical. You are a medieval tanner, and your workshop is an assault on the senses. Tanning was the process of turning raw animal hides into durable leather, a trade that was essential for everything from clothing to armor to belts. But the process was so foul that tanners were often forced to live and work on the outskirts of town, away from the noses of the general populace. Your daily life revolves around a series of large, open vats filled with various concoctions. The first step is to remove all the flesh and fat from the raw hides, a job that is as messy as it sounds, but the truly awful part comes next. The hides need to be softened and de-haired, and the most effective way to do this was to soak them in a mixture of stale urine and lye. Yes, urine again, just like the Fullers. You had to collect this liquid gold from public toilets or by simply going door to door. Imagine standing over a vat of human waste, your hands and arms submerged in the vile mixture, as you push and prod the hides to ensure they are properly saturated. The stench of ammonia and decay must have been overpowering, a constant companion that followed you home. Once the hides were softened, you would scrape the hair off with a dull knife. Then, for the final and most stomach-churning step, the hides would be soaked in a tannin solution made from water and pulverized oak bark. A mainstream historical fact is that the tanning process was a long and arduous one, often taking up to a year to complete. The quality of the finished leather was directly related to the time and care put into the process. A quirky tidbit is that the term tanned has nothing to do with sun exposure, but comes from the word tannin, the organic compound that was essential to the process. The process itself was a fringe science, passed down from father to son, and the exact recipes for the tanning solutions were often closely guarded family secrets. Historians still argue whether the tanners' lack of social status was a result of the foul nature of their work, or if it was a pre-existing prejudice against those who worked with animal carcasses and waste. Your skin is constantly raw and chapped from exposure to the chemicals, and the smell of the tannery has become a permanent part of you. You might get a small cut on your hand, and the risk of a serious infection from the bacteria-laden vats is ever present. You are a pariah, a necessary but despised part of the medieval economy. As you lay your weary head down, the smell of your work will haunt your dreams. The image of the vats, the scraping of the hides, and the constant, nauseating stench will be a grim reminder of the price of your trade, tonight, as you rest. Be grateful for the modern wonders that have made this foul art a relic of a thankfully more hygienic past. You've made it past the tannery, but the smells of London persist, a constant and unwelcome presence. This time, however, the air has a different, more metallic and musty scent, the kind that only comes from a body of water that has been used and abused for centuries. You find yourself standing on the banks of the River Thames. At low tide, the mud is a thick, dark expanse stretching out before you, glinting with the last rays of the setting sun. This is your office. You are a mudlark, a person who scavenges in the river mud for anything of value that has been lost or discarded over the years. Your tools are simple, a small shovel or a hook, and a sack to hold your finds. You are dressed in the oldest, most worn-out clothes you own, clothes that you don't mind getting covered in the foul-smelling river silt. The job is a constant balance between the thrill of discovery and the sheer physical misery of the work. You are on your hands and knees, sifting through centuries of garbage, broken pottery, animal bones, old clay pipes, and every now and then, a coin or a piece of jewellery that someone dropped from a boat or a bridge years ago. It's a literal treasure hunt, but the treasure is often meagre and the work is a dirty, back-breaking slog. A mainstream historical fact is that mudlarking was a common profession for the very poor, especially children. In 18th and 19th century London, it was one of the few ways to make a living when you had no skills, no capital, and no one to turn to. The river itself is a dangerous place. The mud can be deceptively deep, and you have to be careful not to get stuck. The tide comes in quickly, and you have to be vigilant to avoid being swept away. The riverbed is also full of hazards, from broken glass to sharp metal, and a cut could lead to a serious infection. A quirky tidbit is that mudlarks often developed a keen eye for historical objects. They were some of the first people to find Roman and Viking artifacts in London, a fringe area of study that would later develop into modern archaeology. Historians still argue whether the mudlarks were truly independent entrepreneurs or if they were exploited by middlemen who paid them a pittance for their finds. The lack of social safety nets and the desperate need for a few coins often meant they had little choice but to take whatever was offered. You find a small, beautifully carved bone button, a little piece of someone's life from a century ago, and you slip it into your sack. The thrill of the find is a brief, warm moment in a cold, hard world. As the tide begins to turn, you make your way back to the bank, your clothes caked in black mud, the smell of the river clinging to you. The weight of your sack is a physical representation of your day's work, a few coins worth of history and refuse as you drift off. Let the images of the tiny treasures you found float through your mind, a reminder that even in the most miserable of circumstances, there can be a small glimmer of something beautiful. You've waded out of the mud, leaving the mundane but essential work of the mudlark behind. The air is no longer damp and earthy, but now thick with the smell of strange chemicals, sulphur, and something that smells faintly like a burnt coin. You find yourself in a dark, cluttered workshop, filled with bubbling beakers, strange furnaces, and a dizzying array of arcane symbols scrawled on the walls. You are an alchemist, and your life is a constant, frustrating quest for two impossible things: the philosopher's stone, which can turn base metals into gold, and the elixir of life, which promises eternal youth and immortality. Your day is a strange mix of intellectual inquiry and manual labor. You spend hours poring over ancient texts, filled with cryptic diagrams and riddles, trying to unlock the secrets of transmutation. You tend to your furnaces, keeping the fires at just the right temperature for days or even weeks on end. You mix and distill all manner of substances, from mercury and lead to crushed pearls and powdered mummy. It's a job that required an enormous amount of patience and an unshakable belief in the impossible. A mainstream historical fact is that alchemy, while seen today as a kind of pseudoscience, was a precursor to modern chemistry. Alchemists developed many of the tools and techniques that would later become staples of the chemical laboratory, such as distillation and filtration. They were, in a way, the first chemists. Even if their goals were flawed, the work is incredibly dangerous. The substances you work with are often highly toxic. Mercury, in particular, was a favorite of alchemists, and prolonged exposure could lead to mercury poisoning, a neurological disorder with symptoms ranging from tremors to madness. Many alchemists, in their search for eternal life, were slowly killing themselves. A quirky tidbit is that alchemists often had a secret language of their own, using symbols and code words to describe their processes, which made their texts notoriously difficult to decipher. This wasn't just to keep their secrets, it was also a way to avoid persecution from religious and political authorities who viewed their work with suspicion. Historians still argue whether the alchemists truly believed they could turn lead into gold, or if the pursuit was a metaphor for spiritual transformation and enlightenment. The physical work was just one part of a larger, philosophical journey. You spend another day, another week, and another month, and you are no closer to your goals. The lead is still lead, and you are still mortal. You have a few coins in your pocket from a wealthy patron who believes in your work, but you are well aware that their patience and their funding won't last forever. Your workshop is a testament to your failures, a monument of shattered glassware and discarded experiments. As you settle in for the night, the smell of sulfur and lead clinging to your clothes. You can't help but feel a sense of profound exhaustion and a deep, quiet despair. You are chasing a ghost, and the chase is slowly, literally, consuming you. You've left the frustrating world of alchemy and its empty promises, but you haven't found a better lot. The air is now thick with soot and dust, and the sky above is a perpetual grey. You've been transported to Victorian England, a place of industrial progress and shocking poverty. You are a child chimney sweep, and your life is a constant, claustrophobic nightmare. You are small, probably no older than 10, and that is precisely why you have this job. You are a living brush, an essential part of the domestic economy, but a human tragedy in motion. Your day begins before dawn, when you are roused from a cold, hard floor and given a piece of bread and a cup of watery tea. Your master, a harsh man with a face perpetually smudged with soot, gives you your orders. You are to climb a narrow, twisting chimney flue, scraping and sweeping away the soot that has built up inside. The chimneys are often still warm from last night's fires, and the flues are impossibly narrow, sometimes only 9 inches wide. The job is suffocating, claustrophobic, and terrifying. You climb in the dark, using small handholds and footholds, a brush or a scraper in your hand. The soot, a thick, black powder, gets everywhere, filling your eyes, your nose, and your lungs. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a killer. A mainstream historical fact is that chimney sweeping was one of the most dangerous child labour jobs of the era. The children were often forced to climb hot flues, risking burns and suffocation. Many suffered from a specific type of cancer, known as chimney sweep's carcinoma, a result of constant exposure to the carcinogenic soot. The physical dangers are only part of the misery. The children were often beaten by their masters, and they had no one to turn to. A quirky tidbit is that the children were sometimes forced to climb with no clothes on to make it easier for them to fit into the narrowest parts of the flue. They would get stuck, and their master would sometimes light a small fire beneath them to encourage them to climb faster. A horrific and all too common practice. Historians still argue whether the general public was truly unaware of the horrific conditions of the child sweeps, or if they simply chose to ignore it, a necessary evil for the sake of a clean hearth and a warm house. The children were seen as part of the job, and their suffering was simply a fringe consequence. You finally emerge from the chimney, gasping for breath. Your face, hands, and clothes are uniform black. Your eyes sting, and you cough up a gob of phlegm that is as black as coal. You are exhausted, your muscles ache, and your small body is a map of cuts and scrapes. You might get a few coins, or more likely, another piece of bread, before you are off to the next house. As you drift off, the dark, twisting shape of the chimney flue will be the last thing you see, a grim reminder of your day's work and the hard reality of your life. The quiet of the night is your only solace, a brief respite before another day in the dark. You've emerged from the suffocating gloom of the chimney flue, but the darkness has not left you. You are now in the heat and dust of the Roman Colosseum. The deafening roar of 50,000 spectators, a physical force that presses down on you. You are a Roman gladiator, and your life is a brutal, short, and paradoxically glorified one. You are a slave, a prisoner of war, or perhaps a condemned criminal, and your fate is to fight for the entertainment of the masses. Your world is one of violence, spectacle, and the constant threat of a final, fatal blow. The training is grueling. You're not just thrown into the arena, you're sent to a ludus, a gladiatorial school, where you're taught to kill with style and efficiency. You learn to use a variety of weapons: the gladius, a short sword, the scutum, a large shield, or the net and trident of a retiarius. A mainstream historical fact is that gladiators were highly specialized fighters, each with a specific class and fighting style. A murmillo, for instance, fought with a sword and shield, while a thraex had a small shield and a curved dagger. The fights were often a dramatic clash of opposing styles, a kind of martial arts dance of death. The spectators, from the lowliest citizen to the emperor himself, were the final arbiters of your fate. Their thumbs up or down a simple but absolute command. But the fights weren't always to the death. A quirky tidbit is that most gladiatorial bouts were non-lethal, training was expensive, and a dead gladiator was a lost investment. The matches were often a chance to show off skill and bravery, with the loser simply surrendering and a well-trained fighter living to fight another day. They were, in a way, professional athletes. Historians still argue whether the gladiators were truly seen as heroes or if they were merely a dehumanized form of entertainment, their lives as expendable as the animals they were sometimes forced to fight. The crowd's adulation was a strange kind of praise, a celebrity status that came with the constant threat of a brutal end. You stand in the arena, the hot sand beneath your feet, the sun blindingly bright. Your opponent is a man who was your friend in the ludus, and you know his moves and his tells, but now he is an enemy, and you are both just trying to survive. You hear the roar of the crowd, the encouragement of your fellow fighters, and you raise your sword. This is your reality, your purpose, your only chance at a future. The fight is a blur of sweat, steel, and a single-minded focus on staying alive. When it's over, you might be the victor, but the victory feels hollow. You've survived for today, but you know that your next fight is never far away. As you drift off to sleep, the sounds of the crowd will fade, replaced by the quiet memory of the sand, the steel, and the simple, desperate hope of seeing the sun rise one more time. You've survived the arena, but the cheering of the crowd still rings in your ears. Now, a different kind of public performance awaits you, one that requires a powerful voice but offers none of the glory. You're back in a medieval town, but this time, you're not wading in swamps or digging in filth. You're standing on a busy street corner, and your job is to be the town's public crier. In a world without newspapers, radio, or television, you are the human broadcasting system, the sole source of official news and information for a largely illiterate population. Your uniform is a simple, if worn, coat, and your most important tool is your voice, a voice that you've trained to be loud and clear enough to carry over the din of a bustling market square. Your day is a constant series of announcements. You'll ring a handbell to get the attention of the crowd, and then you'll shout the news. It might be a new royal decree from the king, a change in the market prices, or a notice about a lost child. You might have to announce the public execution of a criminal, or the arrival of a foreign dignitary. Your words are the law, and your voice is the authority. A mainstream historical fact is that town criers were a vital part of urban life in Europe for centuries. They were official members of the town government, and their announcements were considered legally binding. The job, while not physically demanding, was incredibly monotonous and could be socially isolating. You were a bearer of news, both good and bad, but you were never truly a part of the crowd. You were a professional mouthpiece, and your personal opinions didn't matter. A quirky tidbit is that the town crier's distinctive bell was a legal requirement in some places, a signal to the townsfolk that what they were about to hear was an official decree, not just idle gossip. The phrase, hear ye, is a direct holdover from this era, a way of getting the attention of the masses. Historians still argue whether the crier's role was more about disseminating information or about asserting the power of the ruling class. The constant repetition of royal decrees and laws was a subtle but effective way of keeping the populace in check. You finish your final announcement for the day, your throat raw and your voice hoarse. The crowd disperses, and you are left alone in the quiet of the square. You are an essential part of the town, but you are also an outsider, a person who talks but never truly converses. As you walk home, you are keenly aware of the power of your voice, but also its limitations. It can inform, but it cannot connect. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, let the silence be a welcome balm to your tired throat, and be grateful for a world where news is a little less personal and a lot more portable. The silence of the public square is broken by the dull, rhythmic sound of a pickaxe striking rock, a sound that echoes in a tight, claustrophobic space. You have left the life of a public crier and have now descended into the cold, dark depths of a medieval salt mine. Your job is to extract one of the most valuable commodities of the time, so valuable it was once used as currency and was the source of the word salary. But the work is nothing short of a nightmare, a constant battle against darkness, danger, and the sheer physical toll of your labor. You are deep underground, far from the sun and the open air. Your only light is a flickering candle attached to your helmet, a tiny beacon in a vast, silent blackness. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and mineral dust, and the walls of the tunnel are a shimmering, crystalline white. Your tool is a heavy pickaxe, and your job is to chip away at the solid walls of salt, a process that is as tedious as it is back-breaking. You work in shifts, the hours blurring into a continuous cycle of swinging your pickaxe, filling a basket, and dragging the heavy load to the surface. A mainstream historical fact is that salt mining was a crucial part of the economy in many parts of the world. From the ancient Roman Empire to medieval Europe, the salt was used not just for flavouring food, but also for preserving it. A vital necessity before the invention of refrigeration, the dangers are ever present. The tunnels could collapse at any moment, trapping you in a tomb of rock and salt. The air is often thin, and the dust you breathe in can cause long-term respiratory illnesses. You also run the risk of getting lost in the labyrinthine tunnels, a terrifying prospect in the absolute darkness. A quirky tidbit is that in some salt mines, the miners would use a special kind of wooden club to test the stability of the tunnel walls. The sound the club made when it struck the rock was an indication of whether the tunnel was safe to enter. This was a fringe, but often life-saving, piece of local knowledge. Historians still argue whether the miners' low social status was a result of the dangerous nature of their work, or if it was a reflection of the fact that they were often prisoners or slaves forced into the job. You finally emerge from the mine, blinking in the harsh sunlight, your body aching and your lungs heavy. You've earned a few coins, and you have the satisfaction of knowing you've helped provide a vital resource for your community, but the toll of the work is etched into your body, a silent record of the years spent in the dark. The phantom weight of the pickaxe and the memory of the absolute silence of the mine will linger with you. As you settle in for the night, the darkness of your room will feel a little different, a little more familiar, and a little less terrifying. You've emerged from the suffocating darkness of the salt mine, but you're not in the sunlight for long. The air you now breathe is a miasma of waste and stagnant water, and the ground beneath you is no longer solid rock, but a slimy, uneven brickwork. You are a Roman sewer cleaner, a person whose job it is to crawl through the bowels of the city and ensure the waste of millions of people doesn't back up and flood the streets. This is, in a very literal sense, a job nobody wanted. The Roman aqueducts were a marvel of engineering, a system that brought fresh water into the city. But the sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, was an equally important, though far less glamorous, piece of infrastructure. Your tools are simple: a shovel, a bucket, and a very strong resolve. You are in a narrow, dark tunnel, the ceiling low and the air thick with a sickeningly sweet odour of decomposition. The sewer is a mix of human waste, animal offal from the markets, and rainwater runoff. The stench is overpowering, a physical presence that coats the back of your throat and makes your eyes water. You have to navigate this dark, treacherous labyrinth, clearing blockages and shoveling the waste into buckets that are then hoisted to the surface. It's a claustrophobic, dirty, and incredibly dangerous job. A mainstream historical fact is that the Cloaca Maxima was a vast and complex system that was in use for centuries, but the upkeep of it was a constant and often thankless task. The sewer cleaners, who were often slaves or the lowest members of society, were the vital, unseen workers who kept the entire system running. The dangers of the job were not just the obvious ones. The sewers were full of vermin, from rats to snakes, and you could never be sure what was lurking in the dark. The air was also a constant threat. Methane gas from the decomposing waste could build up and, if you were unlucky enough to have an open flame, could lead to a sudden, fatal explosion. A quirky tidbit is that Roman law stipulated that any person who fell into a sewer and was rescued would become the property of the person who saved them. a measure designed to encourage rescues, but which also highlights the low value placed on the lives of the sewer cleaners themselves. It was a fringe legal code that speaks volumes about the Roman social hierarchy. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima was as effective at flushing away waste as modern sewers, or if the waste simply sat in the channels, creating a constant health hazard for the city's inhabitants. You finally emerge from a manhole, blinking in the harsh sunlight, your body caked in filth. The clean, crisp air on the surface feels like a luxury you don't deserve. You are a ghost, a phantom who lives and works in the dark underbelly of the city. You are the reason the streets don't flood with refuse, but your work is a secret, a shame that you carry with you as you settle in for the night. The memory of that narrow, dark tunnel and the sickening smell of the waste will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern plumbing, and for a job that doesn't require you to crawl through the waste of an entire city. You've crawled out of the Roman sewers, leaving the filth behind, only to find yourself in the grimy, smoke-filled air of Victorian London. This time, the smell isn't of waste, but of something sharp and acrid, something that stings your nose and makes your eyes water. You are a Victorian matchstick girl, and your job, one of the most toxic and heart-wrenching of the era, is to dip wooden splints into a mixture of white phosphorus. The matchbox is an everyday item now, but back then, it was a product of brutal, unforgiving labour, and the lives of the girls who made them were tragically short. Your workspace is a humid, poorly ventilated factory, the air thick with the fumes of the phosphorus. You sit at a long table with other girls, your fingers moving with a practiced, monotonous speed. You pick up a handful of wooden splints, dip them into the phosphorus paste, and then set them aside to dry. The chemical, which ignites with a satisfying hiss when struck, is also a silent killer. A mainstream historical fact is that white phosphorus is a highly toxic substance, and prolonged exposure to its fumes led to a terrible disease known as phossy jaw. The disease began with a severe toothache and swelling of the gums, and would progress to a gruesome necrosis of the jawbone. The bone would literally rot away, and the suffering was unimaginable. The only treatment was surgical removal of the affected bone, a procedure that was disfiguring and often fatal. The work was not just dangerous, it was also a form of child labour. Many of the girls were young, some as young as 11, and they worked for long hours with few breaks. Their pay was a pittance, barely enough to keep them and their families from starvation. A quirky tidbit is that the girls often saw the phosphorus as a source of fun when they were on their breaks. They'd sometimes dip their fingers in the paste and draw glowing pictures on the walls in the dark, a momentary escape from the grim reality of their lives. This was a fringe practice, a small act of rebellion against the oppressive nature of their work. Historians still argue whether the factory owners were truly ignorant of the dangers of phosphorus or if they simply chose to ignore the clear signs of the disease. A grim example of profit taking precedence over human life. You finish your day's work, your fingers covered in the pasty, white chemical, you're exhausted, your head aches, and you have a nagging, low-level pain in your jaw. It's a pain you've learned to live with, but you know, deep down, that it's a symptom of something far worse. You're a vital cog in the machine of progress, but that machine is slowly, inexorably, eating away at your body. As you drift off, let the faint, eerie glow of the phosphorus fade, and be grateful for a world where such a toxic trade is a relic of the past. You've survived the slow poison of the matchstick factory, but your journey through history's worst jobs isn't over yet. We're going back to Rome, to the world of the fuller, but we're going to focus on a particular part of his job, a part we only hinted at before. You see, the fuller's work, that disgusting business of stomping on wool in vats of urine, required a constant and enormous supply of the primary ingredient, and you, as a fuller's apprentice or labourer, had the unenviable task of collecting it. Your day begins with a large, earthenware pot. You'd carry this pot through the streets of Rome, a human magnet for a specific kind of waste. The city, in its infinite wisdom, had placed large collection jars outside of public and private latrines. These jars, known as amphorae, were where people would, use the bathroom. A mainstream historical fact is that urine was a valuable commodity in Roman society, not just for the fulling trade but for other industrial processes as well. The ammonia content made it a powerful cleaning agent, and its collection and use were a formalized part of the urban economy. Your job was to empty these jars and transport the contents back to the fullery. The work was a constant battle against the heat, the stench, and the social stigma. You'd move through the crowded Roman streets, the smell of the pot preceding you, and people would actively try to avoid you. The job was a masterclass in humiliation, but it was also a way to make a living in a society with few options for the poor. A quirky tidbit is that the Romans had a very communal approach to their public latrines, with multiple people sitting side by side on long stone benches. This meant that the urine you collected was a communal product, a strange and unsettling testament to the Roman way of life. Historians still argue whether the fuller's tax that Vespasian imposed was truly about the money, or if it was an attempt to regulate and legitimize an industry that was otherwise seen as socially vile. The tax, after all, made the state a partner in the disgusting trade. You finish your rounds, your pot full and heavy. The sloshing sound as you walk is a grim reminder of the day's work. You are a human shuttle, a carrier of a substance that is both a symbol of waste and a vital ingredient in the textile industry. As you empty the pot into the larger vats at the fullery, the smell is almost overwhelming, the air thick with the sharp, acidic scent of ammonia and 1,000 other unspeakable things. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that sloshing pot will linger, and you'll be grateful for a world where your daily commute doesn't involve carrying a pot full of pee. You've escaped the foul-smelling world of the fullers and their raw materials, but you haven't escaped the past. The air now carries a faint, floral scent of embalming spices, mixed with the cool, dusty smell of a crypt. You find yourself in ancient Rome, but this isn't the bustling city of the living. This is the quiet, sacred space of the dead, and your job is to be a Roman embalmer. The Romans, unlike the Egyptians, didn't practice mummification on a large scale, but for the wealthy and powerful, preserving the body for a final, public viewing was a matter of great social importance. Your job is to prepare the dead for this final ceremony, a gruesome but meticulous process. Your tools are strange and unsettling, a series of scalpels and hooks, basins for holding liquids, and an assortment of aromatic herbs and oils. The body of the deceased, perhaps a senator or a wealthy merchant, lies on a marble slab. Your work begins with a series of small, precise incisions. The Roman method of embalming, a mainstream historical fact, involved evisceration, the removal of the internal organs, which were then washed and placed in a separate urn. You would then fill the body cavity with a mixture of spices, herbs, and resins, such as myrrh and frankincense. The body would then be anointed with perfumed oils to make it presentable for the viewing. The whole process was a strange blend of religious ritual and practical science. The job was not just about preservation, it was also about dignity. Your work was to make the deceased look as peaceful and lifelike as possible. You would carefully comb the hair, close the eyes, and arrange the limbs. A quirky tidbit is that the Romans sometimes used wax to fill out the cheeks of a deceased person, giving them a more robust and lifelike appearance for the viewing. This was a fringe, cosmetic detail, but it speaks to the Roman desire to honor the dead. Historians still argue whether the embalmers were truly respected for their work, or if they were seen as being too closely associated with death and the supernatural. The work was vital for a dignified funeral, but the people who performed it were often on the social fringes. You finish your work, and the body, now clean, scented, and peaceful, is ready for its final journey. The family pays you well, and they are grateful for your skill and discretion, but you carry the memory of the work with you. The feel of the cold skin, the smell of the spices, and the quiet dignity of the dead. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant reminder of mortality as you settle in for the night. The quiet of the crypt and the scent of the spices will be your only company. Be grateful for a world where the final arrangements for the dead are often handled with a bit more distance and a lot less personal involvement. You've left the peaceful silence of the embalmer's workshop and are now back in the rowdy, brutal streets of a medieval town. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and sour beer, and the sound of a drumbeat, slow and menacing, echoes through the cobblestone streets. You're a medieval executioner, and your job, as we touched on before, is much more than just swinging an axe. You are the embodiment of justice, but a justice that is often cruel and theatrical. Your uniform is often a dark, hooded cloak or a mask, a way to separate you from the rest of society, to make you an anonymous agent of the state's ultimate power. Your work is public and purposeful. The spectacle of a public execution was not just a punishment for the criminal, it was a warning to the populace. The slow drumbeat, the procession to the gallows or the chopping block, and the crowd's jeers were all part of the macabre theatre. But your duties didn't end with a clean beheading. A mainstream historical fact is that the executioner was also the official torturer. You would be called upon to extract confessions from suspects using a variety of horrifying methods, from the rack to the thumbscrews. The goal was not to kill, but to break the will of the accused, to get them to confess to their crimes. This was a job that required a specific kind of physical strength and a complete lack of empathy. Your toolkit includes more than just an axe and a noose. You might have branding irons, used to mark criminals with a sign of their shame, or a whipping post, where you would administer public floggings. A quirky tidbit is that the executioner, despite his vile job, was often a very wealthy man. He was paid for each execution and torture session, and he also had the right to sell the clothes and belongings of the condemned, a fringe perk that could net him a small fortune. He also sometimes sold the body parts of the executed as talismans or medicinal curiosities. The severed hand of a thief was believed by some to bring good luck. Historians still argue whether the executioner's unique status, socially ostracized but professionally empowered, was a reflection of a society that needed to distance itself from the violence it sanctioned, or if it was simply a form of social control. You finish your work for the day. The memory of the crowd's roar and the silent stillness of the body on the ground a grim punctuation mark on your day. You are the ultimate outsider, a man who lives on the fringes of society. But your work is absolutely vital to the social order. You are a constant reminder that the law has teeth, and that those teeth are yours. As you settle in for the night, the memory of the blood and the pain will be your constant companion. Be grateful for a world where justice, for all its faults, is carried out with a little more humanity and a lot less public spectacle. You've witnessed the dark side of Roman law, the brutal spectacle of the public execution. Now, you find yourself back in the world of the gladiators, but not in the roar of the arena. You are in the quiet, disciplined environment of a gladiatorial school, or ludus, and you're learning about the brutal training and the surprisingly strict diet. As a gladiator, your life is a constant cycle of training, and the goal isn't just to be a good fighter, it's to be a good investment. The training is grueling. You spend your days swinging heavy practice swords, rudis, and hitting a wooden post, parlus, to build muscle and stamina. You learn the intricate steps and strikes of your specific fighting style. Whether you're a heavy-armored murmillo or a nimble retiarius with a net and trident, your body is a machine, and you are constantly working to make it more efficient, more deadly. A mainstream historical fact is that gladiators were not just trained to fight, they were also conditioned to endure pain. They were given specific exercises to strengthen their bodies and minds, and their lives were a regimented routine of physical labor and martial practice. But the most surprising part of your life is your diet. You're a gladiator, a professional killer, so you must be eating a diet rich in meat and protein, right? Wrong. A quirky tidbit is that most gladiators were vegetarians. Their diet, known as horderii or barley eaters, consisted primarily of barley, beans, and dried fruit. This wasn't a philosophical choice, it was a practical one. This high-carbohydrate diet, a fringe aspect of gladiator life, was designed to put a layer of fat on their bodies, which might seem counterintuitive for a fighter. But historians still argue that this fat layer, in conjunction with their muscular build, served a purpose. It provided a thick cushion that could protect their vital organs from shallow cuts and scrapes, allowing them to endure longer and more dramatic fights for the entertainment of the crowd. It was a strategy for survival, a way to make the show last longer and to protect the valuable asset that was a well-trained fighter. You finish your meal, a bowl of barley and a few boiled beans, and you can feel the slow, steady energy it gives you. You might have a bruise or a small cut from the day's training, and you might apply a compress of ash and bone meal, a primitive but effective remedy to heal the wound. As you drift off, you are keenly aware that your body is not your own. It is a tool, a piece of property, and you are simply maintaining it for the next performance. The quiet hum of the ludus at night is a far cry from the roar of the arena, but it's just as important to your survival. You've left the Spartan diet of the gladiator behind, but the world of medicine is still a strange and unsettling place. The air is now thick with the cloying scent of herbs, dried roots, and something that smells faintly like a dead mouse. You are a medieval apothecary, and your shop is a strange, cluttered cabinet of curiosities. You're not a doctor, but you're a vital part of the medical ecosystem, the person who creates the remedies, tinctures, and salves that people believe will cure their ailments. Your job is a bizarre combination of herbalist, chemist, and animal part purveyor. You have to know which herbs to grind and which to boil, which roots to dry and which to ferment. A mainstream historical fact is that apothecaries were the forerunners of modern pharmacists. They had a vast knowledge of medicinal plants and their uses, a tradition that stretched back to ancient Greece and Rome. But their knowledge was often a mix of legitimate herbalism and bizarre, unproven superstition. You might, for instance, be called upon to grind up a dried snake skin for a poultice, or to mix a potion with powdered unicorn horn, a substance that was, in reality, the tusk of a narwhal. The remedies you concoct are a mix of the mundane and the truly strange. You might create a simple soothing tea for a cough, or you might mix a potion with a sprinkle of crushed mummified remains. Yes, you heard that right. A quirky tidbit is that mummy powder was a popular remedy in medieval Europe, believed to have healing properties. It was, of course, a placebo at best and a potential source of disease at worst. This fringe practice was a reflection of the desperate measures people would take to try and cure themselves in a world without modern medicine. Historians still argue whether the apothecary's shop was a place of true healing or if it was simply a form of psychological comfort for a populace with no other options. The elaborate rituals and strange ingredients were, in a way, a performance, designed to instill confidence in the patient. You finish mixing a tonic for a nobleman, a concoction of rare herbs and a few drops of what you claim is dragon's blood, but is really just a harmless red dye. The nobleman leaves, and you are left alone in the quiet of your shop, surrounded by jars of strange, unspeakable things. You are a professional, and your work is valued, but you know, deep down, that you are just as likely to cause harm as you are to heal. As you settle in for the night, the smell of the herbs will be your constant companion, a reminder of the strange, unproven world of medieval medicine. You've left the smelly apothecary shop behind, but your next job is one of the most intimate, and frankly, bizarre, in all of royal history. The year is the 16th century, and you are in the court of King Henry VIII. Your job, the groom of the stool. The title sounds a bit like an equestrian trainer, doesn't it? The reality is far less glamorous. A stool was the term for a commode or a privy, and your job, as the name suggests, was to assist the king with his most private bathroom needs. This wasn't just a simple matter of handing over some parchment and walking away. It was a formal, ritualized process that came with immense power and access. You would assist the king in the act itself, providing a basin of water for him to wash his hands afterward, and sometimes even wiping his royal behind. It was a job that required an incredible level of trust and discretion. The man who held this position was often a close friend of the king, and his proximity to the monarch at his most vulnerable moments gave him an unparalleled opportunity to influence royal decisions. A mainstream historical fact is that the groom of the stool was one of the most powerful and sought-after positions in the Tudor court. The man who held the title was a confidant, a political advisor, and a close friend of the king. He was privy to all the secrets of the court, and his influence was often greater than that of many high-ranking nobles. The job, while disgusting by modern standards, was a mark of honour and a testament to the trust the king placed in you. A quirky tidbit is that the king's health, and particularly his bowel movements, were a matter of national security. The groom of the stool was a sort of royal health monitor, and he would often report on the state of the king's bowels to his physicians and to the court. This fringe detail highlights how a monarch's personal life was also a public matter. Historians still argue whether the groom of the stool's power was a formal part of his job description or if it was simply a natural consequence of his constant, intimate access to the monarch. The very nature of the job, a service that we would consider humiliating, was the key to his immense power. You finish your service for the day, And the king, a man of immense power and appetite, nods in approval. You've earned his trust, and you have access to his ear in a way that no one else does. The job is a strange mix of the mundane and the deeply political. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that day's service will linger. Be grateful for a world where political influence is a little more formal and a lot less personal. You've left the rarefied, if gross, world of the Tudor court and are now back in a simpler, but equally disgusting, reality. The setting is a medieval farm, the air thick with the smell of animals and hay, but also something far less pleasant. You are a dung gatherer, a person whose job it is to collect animal waste from the fields and streets. This sounds simple enough, but in a world with no tractors or mechanized tools, it was a constant, back-breaking, and incredibly smelly job. Your tools are simple, a wicker basket and a small, short-handled shovel. You spend your day walking behind animals, picking up their droppings. This wasn't just a matter of sanitation, it was a matter of survival. The dung, or night soil, as it was sometimes called, was a vital resource. It was used as fertilizer to enrich the soil for farming, and it was also dried and used as fuel for fires. A mainstream historical fact is that the use of animal dung for agricultural purposes was a fundamental part of pre-industrial farming practices for millennia. It was a crucial step in a sustainable, if gross, cycle of life and growth. The work was a constant battle against the elements and the sheer volume of the material. You would trudge through muddy fields, your boots sinking into the muck, and you would fill your basket, over and over again. The job was a masterclass in stoicism and a reminder that every part of the ecosystem, even the waste, had a purpose. A quirky tidbit is that the dried dung was sometimes mixed with other materials, like straw and clay, to create a kind of building material, a fringe use that shows the resourcefulness of people in a pre-industrial age. Historians still argue whether the dung gatherer was truly an independent worker or if they were a kind of serf, bound to the land and the farmer who owned it. The nature of the work, and its vital importance to the farm, suggests a close, if not always equal, relationship. You finish your day's work, your clothes stained and the smell of the farm clinging to you. You are a humble but essential part of the agricultural system, a person who turns waste into a valuable resource. As you settle in for the night, the image of that full basket will be a grim reminder of your daily toil. Be grateful for a world with modern fertilizer, and for a job that doesn't require you to literally pick up after animals all day long. You've left the fields and the smell of dung behind, and you're back in Victorian England. But this isn't the suffocating chimney of before. The air is cold and damp, and the gas lamps have just flickered to life. The city is quiet, save for the distant clatter of a horse-drawn carriage and a peculiar, rhythmic tapping sound. You are a knocker-upper, and your job is to wake people up for work in an age before alarm clocks. Your tools are simple but effective. A long, thin bamboo stick and a pea shooter. You walk the streets in the pre-dawn hours, your footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. Your clients, factory workers and dock labourers, live in the crowded tenements that line the streets. You don't have a schedule, just a list of names and addresses in your head. Your job is to make sure they get up on time, and your method is a strange form of a reverse house call. You would tap on their windows with your long pole, or use your pea shooter to fire dried peas at their glass until they woke up. A mainstream historical fact is that the knocker-upper was a common and well-respected profession in the industrial cities of England and Ireland during the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were a vital part of the working-class economy, ensuring that the factories and docks had enough labour to run on time. The work was not physically demanding, but it was incredibly monotonous and required a precise sense of timing. You had to know when to start your rounds and how long to stay at each window, and you had to be loud enough to wake the person up without breaking their glass. A quirky tidbit is that some knocker-uppers would use a small wooden mallet instead of a stick, a fringe method that was considered more effective but also more likely to cause a ruckus. Historians still argue whether the knocker-upper's job was truly a profession or if it was a side hustle for people who were already awake at odd hours, such as night watchmen or police constables. The work was a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of a populace that had to solve a simple problem without the aid of technology. You finish your rounds, your arm aching from the constant tapping, and the city begins to stir. The quiet streets are now filled with the sound of footsteps and the chatter of people making their way to work. You've done your part. A human alarm clock for an entire neighborhood. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that rhythmic tapping will be your only company, a sound that you are both a creator and a victim of. You've left the pre-dawn world of the knocker-upper and have entered a place of immense wealth and power, but also, surprisingly, immense filth. You're in a grand medieval castle, a stone fortress of high walls and towering spires, but you're not a knight or a king's advisor. You are the castle privy cleaner, and your job is to empty the castle's toilets. The castle, for all its splendor, had no modern plumbing. The toilets were often simple holes in the wall that emptied into a cesspit or a moat below, and when those cesspits filled up, it was your job to get them cleared out. The work, much like that of the Gong Farmer, was done at night to avoid the smell and the social stigma. You would descend into the pit with a bucket and a shovel, and you would begin the revolting task of clearing out centuries of royal waste. The stench was beyond imagination, a thick, suffocating cloud of decomposition that would cling to you for days. A mainstream historical fact is that the castle's sanitary arrangements, or lack thereof, were often a major source of disease. The cesspits, when they were not emptied, would overflow and contaminate the castle's water supply, a major cause of sickness and death. Your work, in a grim way, was a matter of public health. But the job, for all its foulness, had a few surprising perks. A quirky tidbit is that the privy cleaners sometimes found lost treasures in the cesspits. A ring that slipped from a noblewoman's finger, a coin that fell from a knight's pouch, or a piece of valuable jewellery that someone dropped by mistake. These were all things that could be found in the muck. This fringe benefit made the job a grim form of a lottery, a constant, low-level hope for a big find. Historians still argue whether the privy cleaner was truly a paid professional, or if they were a serf whose labour was simply part of their feudal obligation to the lord of the castle. The lack of detailed records makes it hard to know for sure. You finally emerge from the pit, the smell of the waste clinging to your clothes and skin. You have a few coins in your pocket, and you might even have a small piece of jewellery or a coin that you found in the muck. A silent reward for your disgusting work. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant source of shame and social ostracism. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that pit and the silent, cool coins in your pocket will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern indoor plumbing, and for a job that doesn't require you to wade through the refuse of an entire castle. You've escaped the foul-smelling cesspit of the castle, but you are still in a position of power, albeit a frightening one. The setting is ancient Rome, and you're no longer an ordinary citizen. You are a lictor, a sort of personal bodyguard and enforcer for a high-ranking magistrate, and your job is to carry a bundle of rods tied around an axe. This bundle is called a fasces, and it is not just a ceremonial symbol. It is a symbol of the magistrate's power, a power you are expected to enforce with brutal, physical violence. The fasces is a terrifying object. The rods, a mainstream historical fact, were used for a form of corporal punishment known as scourging, a brutal public flogging that could be used on Roman citizens. The axe, a more dangerous and terrifying part of the bundle, was used for capital punishment, or beheading. Your presence as a lictor was a constant, visual reminder of the magistrate's authority to punish, to torture, and to kill. You walked in front of him, and the citizens who saw you would know, without a doubt, that the power of Rome was walking among them. The job was not just about carrying a bundle of sticks and an axe. It was about performing your duties with an unflinching resolve. You were expected to clear a path for the magistrate, to command respect from the crowd, and to carry out the sentence of the law with no hesitation. The lictor was a professional enforcer, a human symbol of the state's power. A quirky tidbit is that the number of lictors a magistrate had was a direct representation of his rank. A consul, one of the two chief magistrates of the Roman Republic, was preceded by 12 lictors, while a praetor, a lesser magistrate, had only 2. Historians still argue whether the fasces was meant to be a symbol of the magistrate's power or a grim reminder of the public's submission to the law. It was a fringe element of Roman culture that carried a heavy symbolic weight. You finish your day's work, and the magistrate retires to his home. You are a silent, intimidating presence, a ghost who walks in front of a powerful man. The fasces is a heavy weight on your shoulder, a physical representation of the law. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant reminder of the state's potential for violence. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that heavy bundle and the silent, averted eyes of the crowd will be your only company. Be grateful for a world where law and order, for all their faults, are enforced with a little less fanfare and a lot more oversight. The intimidating presence of the lictor has faded, and the air is now thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. The rhythmic clang of a hammer on an anvil echoes in the air, a sound that is both powerful and monotonous. You are a medieval blacksmith, and your life is one of fire, iron, and immense physical labor. You are a master of a trade that is vital to every aspect of medieval life, from farming to warfare, but the work is unforgiving, and the physical toll is a constant companion. Your workshop is a dark, smoky cavern, lit by the fiery heart of your forge. Your tools are simple but powerful, a heavy hammer, a pair of tongs, and an anvil. Your work begins with a piece of raw iron, and through a process of heating and hammering, you turn it into something useful. You might be making a horseshoe for a farmer's horse, a sword for a knight, or a simple nail for a carpenter. The work is a constant dance with fire. You have to know when to heat the metal and when to cool it, when to strike it with force and when to shape it with a delicate touch. A mainstream historical fact is that the blacksmith was a central figure in any medieval village or town. His skills were indispensable, and he was often one of the most respected members of the community, despite the physical hardships of his work. But the job was not without its dangers. The constant exposure to heat, smoke, and loud noise took a heavy toll on the body. You were always at risk of burns from the molten metal, and your lungs were constantly filled with the acrid smoke of the forge. A quirky tidbit is that blacksmiths were sometimes called upon to perform a kind of folk medicine. They would use their strong hands to perform a kind of massage or physical therapy on people with muscle ailments, a fringe practice that blurred the line between craft and healing. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's high social status was a direct result of his essential skills, or if it was also a reflection of the fact that his work was seen as a kind of magical art, a person who could turn a common rock into a tool of power and utility. You finish your day's work, and your muscles aching and your face and arms smudged with soot. You've earned a good living, and you have the respect of your community. But the toll of the work is etched into your hands, a testament to the years of hard labor. As you settle in for the night, the rhythmic clang of the hammer will be the last sound you hear, a grim lullaby that you are both the creator and a victim of. Be grateful for a world with modern machinery, and for a job that doesn't require you to literally sweat and bleed for a living. You've left the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's forge behind, but you are still in a world of hard, manual labor. The setting is Victorian London, and the air, already thick with coal smoke, has a new, revolting smell. It's the smell of, well, let's just say it's not roses. You are a pure finder, a person whose job it is to collect dog feces from the streets. The name is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Pure was the term for the dog dung, a strange piece of jargon in a fringe industry, and this job, one of the most uniquely gross of the era, was a vital part of the tanning process. Your tools are simple, a small shovel or a bucket, and a keen eye for what you are looking for. You would walk the streets and parks of London, gathering the droppings of dogs, the feces, which was a constant and unhygienic presence on the city's cobblestones, was a valuable commodity. It was sold to tanneries, the very same ones we talked about earlier, where it was mixed with water to create a slurry. The enzymes in the dog feces help to soften the leather hides and remove the fat and hair, a crucial step in the tanning process. A mainstream historical fact is that the demand for pure was so high that some people would even pay for it, a testament to the value of this revolting raw material. The job was not just disgusting, it was also a constant source of social stigma. You were at the very bottom of the social ladder, a person who literally made a living by collecting waste. You were also constantly at risk of disease, from the feces itself, and from the cuts and scrapes that were a constant part of your job. A quirky tidbit is that the pure finders were sometimes called Toshers, or mudlarks, as their work often overlapped with the scavenging of the river mud. This fringe overlap shows how interconnected these desperate, low-paying jobs were in a society with few safety nets. Historians still argue whether the pure finders were truly an independent profession, or if they were simply a kind of scavenger, a person who would do any job, no matter how foul, to make a living. The lack of detailed records makes it a hard question to answer. You finish your day's work, your bucket full and heavy, the stench of the feces clings to your clothes and skin, and you are exhausted from the long day of walking. The coins you have earned are a grim comfort, a small reward for a day spent on your hands and knees. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that bucket and the smell of the waste will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern sanitation and for a job that doesn't require you to make a living from the refuse of animals. You've left the vile world of the pure finder behind, but your journey into history's most frustrating and dangerous professions isn't over. We are returning to the strange, smoky workshop of the alchemist, but this time we're going to focus not just on the futility of the work, but on the very real dangers that came with it. An alchemist, remember, was a person who sought to turn lead into gold and to create an elixir of eternal life. But the pursuit of these impossible goals came at a very high price, a price that was often paid with the alchemist's health and sanity. Your workspace is a confusing array of strange chemical reactions. A bubbling concoction of mercury and sulfur sends acrid fumes into the air. A retort, a long-necked flask, heats over an open flame. The liquid inside a strange, shifting colour. The work requires an enormous amount of patience and a willingness to work with incredibly toxic substances, most of which you don't even know are poisonous. A mainstream historical fact is that alchemists, in their pursuit of the transmutation of metals, were constantly exposed to heavy metals like mercury, lead, and arsenic. These substances were a fundamental part of their processes, and prolonged exposure often led to a slow, debilitating poisoning. The symptoms of this poisoning, from tremors and memory loss to madness, were often mistaken for a kind of spiritual or intellectual decline, a tragic and ironic twist for a person seeking immortality. The pursuit of the philosopher's stone was a literal race against time, but not in the way you might think. It was a race against your own physical decline. A quirky tidbit is that some alchemists, in their search for the elixir of life, would drink concoctions that contained small amounts of gold dust, believing that the precious metal would somehow imbue them with its longevity. This was a fringe, desperate practice that, of course, did nothing but hasten their demise. Historians still argue whether the alchemists' pursuit of gold and immortality was a true scientific inquiry, or if it was simply a form of ritualized madness, a pursuit that was more about the process than the goal. The lack of any real progress, and the constant physical and mental toll of the work, suggests a kind of self-destructive obsession. You finish another day of fruitless work, your hands stained and your head foggy. The air in your workshop is a heavy, metallic cloud that you can almost taste. The money from your patron will run out, and you are no closer to your goals. You are a victim of your own ambition, a person who is slowly, inexorably, killing themselves in the name of a dream. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that strange, swirling liquid in the retort will be your only company, a grim reminder of your futile and dangerous work. You've escaped the alchemist's toxic workshop, but your fate is just as grim. You are a Roman slave, and your life is a relentless cycle of hard labor, deprivation, and total submission to the will of your master. In a society that was built on the backs of forced labor, your existence is a testament to the brutal reality of the ancient world. You are not a person in the eyes of the law. You are property, a living tool with no rights, no freedoms, and no hope of a better life. Your work is not a profession, it is a sentence. You might be working in the fields, toiling in the sun from dawn until dusk, a hoe or a sickle in your hand. The work is backbreaking, and the food is meager, just enough to keep you from starving. Or you might be a galley slave, chained to an oar, pulling a ship through the choppy waters of the Mediterranean. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and salt, and the rhythm of the whip on your back is a constant, painful reminder of your status. A mainstream historical fact is that slavery was a fundamental part of the Roman economy, with an estimated 20–30% of the Roman population being enslaved. The sheer number of slaves meant that their labor was essential for everything from agriculture to construction to domestic work. The danger wasn't just in the physical labor. The punishment for any infraction, no matter how small, was swift and brutal. You could be whipped, branded, or even crucified for a minor mistake. The lack of freedom, the constant fear of punishment, and the sheer monotony of the work made the life of a slave a truly miserable existence. A quirky tidbit is that a Roman slave could sometimes buy their freedom, a practice known as manumission. This was a fringe opportunity, a rare chance at a new life, but it was a testament to the hope that some slaves held on to. Historians still argue whether the Roman system of slavery was more or less brutal than other ancient forms of forced labor. The lack of a racial component, for instance, made it a different kind of institution. But the cruelty was just as real. You finish your day's work, your body aching and your stomach empty. You are a ghost, a phantom who lives and works in the shadows, and your life is a constant, quiet struggle for survival. As you settle in for the night, the weight of your chains and the memory of the day's toil will be your only company. Be grateful for a world where freedom is a universal right, and for a life that is your own to live. The silence of the Roman slave's life is broken by a new, powerful sound. It's the deep, resonant clang of a massive bell, a sound that is both a symbol of the divine and a source of incredible physical pain. You are a medieval bell ringer, and your job is to use your brute strength to make the town's massive bells ring. This is not a job for the weak. It is a job that requires a strong back, a powerful grip, and a willingness to endure a deafening racket that will slowly but surely take away your hearing. Your workspace is a dark, dusty bell tower, a place of wood and stone that smells faintly of old rope and bat droppings. Your tools are simple, a series of heavy ropes that lead up to the bells above you. Your job is to grab the rope and pull it with all your might, a rhythmic, synchronized dance of power and timing. The bells themselves are massive, some of them weighing thousands of pounds, and the force required to make them swing is immense. A mainstream historical fact is that bells were a vital part of medieval life. They were used to mark the time of day, to call people to prayer, to warn of a fire or an invasion, and to celebrate a victory or mourn a death. The bell ringer was an essential part of the town's rhythm, a human metronome that kept the community in sync. But the work was not without its dangers. The ropes could fray and break, sending you tumbling to the floor. The constant pull of the ropes could lead to muscle and joint problems, and the sheer volume of the bells was a constant threat to your hearing. A quirky tidbit is that the bell ringers had a kind of secret language of their own, a way of communicating with each other through the ropes to ensure the bells rang in a perfect, synchronized harmony. This was a fringe practice that showed the professional pride of the bell ringers. Historians still argue whether the bell ringer's job was a religious calling or a secular profession. The bells were a part of the church, but the work was a kind of manual labor that required no special piety. You finish your day's work, your body aching and your ears ringing. The sound of the bells will stay with you for hours, a phantom echo that will haunt your sleep. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant reminder of your physical limitations. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that rope and the deafening clang of the bells will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern technology, and for a job that doesn't require you to sacrifice your hearing for a living. The ringing of the bells has faded, and you are back in the stinky world of the Roman fuller. But this time, you are in a position of power. You're no longer the grunt who stomps in vats of urine, or the apprentice who collects the raw material. You are the business owner, a man who has made a fortune from the most disgusting trade in Rome, your fullery. A bustling workshop of vats, presses, and drying racks is a testament to your success. Your days are no longer spent in the vats, they are spent managing your business. You hire the labourers, you negotiate with the wool merchants, and you pay your taxes to the emperor. The fullery is a messy, loud, and incredibly profitable enterprise. The work is still disgusting, but you are a man of means. And the smell of money, as Vespasian famously said, does not stink. A mainstream historical fact is that fulleries were a significant and profitable part of the Roman economy. They were often owned by wealthy men or women, and they employed a large number of people, from the manual labourers to the skilled craftsmen who worked the presses and the drying racks, but the work, for all its profitability, was still viewed with a certain degree of social stigma. A quirky tidbit is that the fullers had their own guild, a professional association that gave them a certain level of social status and protection. This was a fringe part of Roman society, a way for a socially outcast profession to gain a certain level of respectability. Historians still argue whether the Fullers' Guild was truly a source of power or if it was a form of self-segregation, a way for a despised profession to create its own social circle. The work was vital, but the people who performed it were often looked down upon. You finish your day, and the smell of the fullery clings to your clothes. You are a wealthy man, but you are still a fuller, a person who makes a living from the waste of others. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that foul smell will be a constant reminder of where you came from. Be grateful for a world where money is not made from such vile sources, and for a job that doesn't require you to become a pariah. The smell of the fullery has faded, but a new, equally pungent odour fills the air. It's the smell of raw, unworked leather, a thick, musky scent that speaks of animal hides and hard labour. You are a medieval leather worker, and your life is a constant battle against the smells and the physical demands of your trade. While the tanner worked with the raw hides, you are the person who turns that finished leather into a product, whether it's a belt, a pair of shoes, or a suit of armour. Your work is a kind of art, but it's an art that comes with a constant physical toll. Your workshop is a cluttered, dusty space, filled with rolls of cured leather and the tools of your trade, sharp knives, heavy hammers, and a variety of awls and punches. Your work begins with a large piece of leather, and through a process of cutting, stitching, and shaping, you turn it into something useful. You might be making a saddle for a knight's horse, or a pair of gloves for a nobleman, or a simple leather pouch for a merchant. The work is precise and demanding, and it requires a steady hand and a keen eye for detail. A mainstream historical fact is that the leatherworker was a highly skilled craftsman, and his trade was vital to every aspect of medieval life. Leather was used for everything, from clothing and footwear to armour and tools, and the demand for his skills was constant, but the job, for all its respectability, was not without its dangers. The knives you worked with were sharp, and a moment's inattention could lead to a serious cut. The constant work with your hands could lead to joint and muscle problems, and the fine dust from the leather could be a source of respiratory illness. A quirky tidbit is that leather workers sometimes used their own teeth to soften and shape the leather, a fringe practice that was a testament to their dedication and to the lack of specialized tools. Historians still argue whether the leatherworker's social status was a result of his essential skills or if it was a reflection of his position in a social hierarchy that valued hard work and craftsmanship. The trade, for all its foul smells, was seen as a noble one. You finish your day's work, your hands aching and your clothes smudged with leather dust. You've created something beautiful and useful, and you have the satisfaction of a job well done. But the physical toll of the work is etched into your body, a silent record of the years of hard labour. As you settle in for the night, the smell of the leather will be your constant companion, a reminder of your work and your place in the world. Be grateful for a world with modern machinery, and for a job that doesn't require you to literally bite off more than you can chew. The smell of worked leather fades, and you are back in the bustling, smoggy streets of Victorian London. This time, the air has the faint metallic scent of old junk and the musty smell of things long forgotten. You are a rag and bone man, a professional scavenger who makes a living by collecting discarded junk from the streets and alleyways. Your work is a kind of recycling, a fringe profession that was born out of poverty and a need to survive in a city with little in the way of a social safety net. Your tools are simple, a large sack or a cart, and a keen eye for anything that might have value. You walk the streets, a quiet, almost invisible figure, and you call out your trade, rags, rag and bone. You're looking for old clothes that can be turned into shoddy, a cheap fabric, or bones that can be ground down for glue or fertilizer. You're also on the lookout for scrap metal, old bottles, or anything else that a person might have thrown away. A mainstream historical fact is that the rag and bone man was a common sight in the cities of England and America during the industrial era. They were a vital part of the urban economy, and their work was a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of a populace that had to make a living from nothing. The job was not just about finding things, it was also about negotiation. You had to have a good sense of the value of what you were collecting, and you had to be able to haggle with the people who were selling you their junk. A quirky tidbit is that the rag and bone man was sometimes seen as a kind of urban ghost, a person who lived in the shadows and who saw the underbelly of a city that most people tried to ignore. This fringe perception was a reflection of the social stigma that came with the job. Historians still argue whether the rag and bone man's profession was truly a source of social mobility or if it was a kind of poverty trap, a job that kept people on the very edge of destitution. The lack of a steady income and the constant competition made it a very difficult life. You finish your day's work, your cart heavy and your sack full. The weight of the junk is a physical representation of your day's work. A small amount of money for a lot of walking and a lot of work. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that call, rags will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern recycling and sanitation, and for a job that doesn't require you to make a living from the refuse of others. The sound of the rag and bone man's call has faded, and you're now in the great hall of a medieval castle. But the atmosphere is not one of grandeur, it's one of nervous laughter and tense silence. You are a medieval jester, a professional fool whose job it is to entertain the king and his court, but your work, for all its humour, is also incredibly dangerous. Your wit is a double-edged sword, and a bad joke could cost you your life. Your uniform is a motley outfit of bright colours and a cap with bells on it. A costume designed to make you stand out and to signal your role as a fool, but your most important tool is your mind. You are a master of improvisation, a person who can tell a joke, sing a song, or perform a silly dance at a moment's notice. Your job is to keep the king entertained, to lighten the mood, and to provide a moment of comic relief in a world that is often brutal and unforgiving. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester, or court fool, was a well-established and important part of royal courts across Europe for centuries. They were a kind of living pressure valve, a person who could speak the truth to power without fear of reprisal, as long as it was wrapped in a joke. But the jester's freedom was a fragile thing, a joke that landed wrong, a moment of insubordination, or a king who was simply in a bad mood could lead to a swift and brutal punishment. The line between being a funny man and a dead man was incredibly thin. A quirky tidbit is that some jesters were known for their physical dexterity and their ability to perform acrobatics, a fringe skill that was a welcome addition to the simple jokes and songs. Historians still argue whether the jester was truly a free-speaking agent of truth or if he was simply a puppet of the king, a person who was only allowed to speak the truth when the king wanted to hear it. The role was a strange mix of the submissive and the powerful. You finish your routine, and the king, a man of immense power and a famously bad temper, gives a small, grudging smile. You've survived for another day. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant reminder that your life is a performance, and that the audience, a single man, holds your fate in his hands. As you settle in for the night, the jingle of the bells on your hat will be a grim lullaby, a sound that reminds you of your precarious position. Be grateful for a world where humour, for all its faults, is not a life or death matter. The jingle of the jester's bells has faded, and you're now back in the brutal world of the Roman gladiators. But this time, you're not an athlete. You are a lanista, the owner and manager of a gladiatorial school, or ludus. Your life is a strange mix of the mundane and the macabre. You are a businessman, a trainer, and a warden, and your livelihood depends on your ability to produce good fighters and sell them for a profit. The work is a constant gamble, a high-stakes venture that can make you a fortune or bankrupt you in a single day. Your ludus is a complex organization. You have to buy and sell slaves, train them, feed them, and equip them for battle. The training is a mix of discipline and cruelty, designed to make the slaves into professional killers. You have a team of trainers, or doctores, who specialize in a particular fighting style, and you have to manage them all. A mainstream historical fact is that the lanista was a crucial part of the Roman entertainment industry. They were the producers, the managers, and the impresarios of the gladiatorial games, and they held an immense amount of power, both in the arena and in the political backrooms of Rome. But the work was not without its dangers. A gladiator who died in the arena was a lost investment, and a gladiator who rebelled could lead to a massive, bloody slave revolt. You had to be constantly vigilant. A warden who was always a step ahead of his charges. A quirky tidbit is that the Lannister was often a despised figure in Roman society, seen as a kind of pimp or a slave trader who profited from the blood of others. This social stigma was a fringe part of his life, a constant reminder of the source of his wealth. Historians still argue whether the Lannister was truly an independent entrepreneur or if he was a kind of a state-sanctioned contractor, a person who was a crucial part of the Roman government's control over the masses. You finish your day, and the sound of the practice swords on the wooden posts echoes in the quiet of the ludus. You've made a good living, and you have a new shipment of slaves coming in tomorrow, a new crop of fighters to train and sell. But the knowledge of what you do, and the disdain of the Roman society, will be your constant companion. As you settle in for the night, the weight of your business and the memory of the blood will be your only company. Be grateful for a world where sports are a form of entertainment, not a matter of life and death, and where the athletes are free men and women. The grim reality of the Lannister's life has faded, and you find yourself back where our journey began, in a muddy, stagnant fenland. The air is damp and smells of decomposing leaves and wet earth. You are a leech collector, and you're getting ready for another day of work. We've already talked about the grim reality of this job, but now we'll focus on the slimy, living product you're collecting and the trade itself. Your tools are still your legs and an unflinching tolerance for discomfort. You wade into the murky water, and the leeches, tiny, black, and hungry, begin to attach themselves to your skin. The feeling is a weird combination of a tickle and a small, sharp pinch. You stand there for hours, the cool mud seeping into your boots, as the leeches slowly fill themselves with your blood. Once they're plump and swollen, you carefully pull them off and drop them into a wet sack. A mainstream historical fact is that the demand for medicinal leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, skyrocketed in the 19th century due to the popular medical practice of bloodletting. Doctors believed that removing blood from a patient could cure a wide range of diseases, and the demand was so high that some European countries even banned the export of leeches. The trade itself was a strange and often dangerous one. A quirky tidbit is that the leeches were sometimes kept in large glass jars with perforated lids, and they were a common sight in apothecaries and barber surgeons' shops. They were a living medical tool, a fringe piece of the medical toolkit that was used for centuries. Historians still argue whether the leech collector's life was truly a dangerous one, or if the primary hardship was simply the social stigma that came with a job that was so closely associated with swamps and blood. The pay, while better than some other jobs, was a small consolation for the physical discomfort and the social isolation. You finish your day's work, your legs covered in tiny bloody puncture wounds. You have a sack full of writhing, living medicine, and you are ready to sell them to the local doctor. The memory of the cool water and the sliminess of the leeches will linger with you. Be grateful for a world with modern medicine, and for a job that doesn't require you to be a human buffet for a living. The slime of the leeches is a distant memory, replaced by the damp, cold, and claustrophobic air of a Victorian coal mine. You are a coal miner, a person who spends their life in the dark, and your job is to extract the black gold that powers the Industrial Revolution. The work is brutal, and the dangers are constant, a silent threat that can end your life in a flash. Your day begins before the sun rises, and you descend into the earth in a rickety cage, a metal box that is your only connection to the world above. The air grows colder and damper as you descend, and the only light comes from the flicker of your lamp, a small beacon in the absolute blackness. Your tools are simple, a pickaxe and a shovel, and your job is to chip away at the coal face, a back-breaking process that leaves your muscles aching and your lungs filled with coal dust. A mainstream historical fact is that coal mining was one of the most dangerous jobs of the era, and the life expectancy of a miner was significantly lower than that of other labourers. The constant exposure to coal dust led to a debilitating respiratory disease known as black lung, and the risk of a cave-in or a gas explosion was ever present. The dangers weren't just physical. The miners, often children as young as 8, worked in conditions that were inhumane and a constant source of fear. A quirky tidbit is that miners sometimes brought canaries into the mine with them. The birds, being more sensitive to toxic gases like carbon monoxide, would collapse and die before the gas reached dangerous levels for humans. This was a fringe, but often life-saving, practice. Historians still argue whether the miners' low wages and terrible working conditions were a result of the high demand for coal, or if they were a reflection of a society that placed a low value on the lives of its labourers. The work was vital, but the people who performed it were seen as disposable. You finish your day's work, your body covered in black dust and your lungs heavy with the foul air. You've earned a few coins, but the knowledge of what you've endured is a heavy weight. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that dark, narrow tunnel and the constant fear of a cave-in will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern safety regulations and for a job that doesn't require you to risk your life for a living. You've emerged from the suffocating darkness of the coal mine, but you're not in the clean, open air for long. You're back on the streets of a bustling medieval town, but this time you're not a professional. You are a scavenger, a person who lives on the fringes of society, making a living by picking up whatever has been discarded. The work is a constant, quiet struggle for survival. A testament to the fact that in a world with no waste disposal, everything had a second life. Your tools are simple, a wicker basket and a keen eye for anything that might have value. You walk the streets and alleys, a silent, almost invisible figure, and you search through the piles of refuse that have been thrown from windows or left on the street corners. You're not looking for anything specific, you're just looking for anything. A piece of old cloth that can be patched and used, a discarded piece of wood that can be used for a fire, or a broken piece of pottery that can be sold for a few coins. A mainstream historical fact is that scavenging was a common way of life for the urban poor in medieval Europe. The lack of a formalized waste disposal system meant that the streets were often filled with refuse, and a resourceful person could make a living from it. The work was not just a matter of finding things, it was also a matter of a constant, low-level competition with other scavengers. You had to be quick, and you had to be able to see the value in things that others had overlooked. A quirky tidbit is that scavengers would sometimes be called dustmen, a term that was a bit of a misnomer, as they were not just collecting dust but anything they could find. The term, a fringe detail, was a way of giving a legitimate name to a profession that was seen as socially undesirable. Historians still argue whether the scavenger's life was truly a free one, or if they were simply a kind of human waste disposal system for the rest of society. A person who did the work that no one else wanted to do. You finish your day's work, your basket heavy and your hands dirty. You have a few coins in your pocket, enough for a meagre meal and a place to sleep. But the knowledge of what you've endured is a heavy weight. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that day's finds will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern sanitation and for a job that doesn't require you to make a living from the refuse of others. The silent world of the scavenger is gone, and you're now in a quiet, sun-drenched scriptorium in ancient Rome. The air smells of parchment, ink, and a faint, sweet scent of beeswax. You are a Roman scribe, a person who makes a living by writing and copying texts. This might sound like a privileged and safe job compared to the other ones we've explored, and in many ways it was. You are not a gladiator or a sewer cleaner. You are literate, a rare and valuable skill in a world where most people could not read or write. But your work, for all its prestige, was a constant, mind-numbingly tedious labour. Your tools are simple, a reed pen, a small pot of ink, and a stack of parchment scrolls. Your job is to sit at a desk for hours on end, carefully and meticulously copying texts. You might be copying a work of philosophy, a book of poetry, or a legal document. The work requires an incredible amount of focus and a steady hand. A mainstream historical fact is that scribes were the backbone of the Roman literary world. Before the invention of the printing press, every book had to be copied by hand, and the scribes were the only ones who could do it. They were the human photocopiers of the ancient world, and their work was vital for the preservation and dissemination of knowledge. But the work was not without its physical toll. The constant and repetitive motion of your hand could lead to carpal tunnel syndrome, and the strain on your eyes from working in poor light could lead to long-term vision problems. The job was a silent, slow form of physical decline. A quirky tidbit is that scribes would sometimes use a special kind of ruler, known as a T-square, to ensure their lines were straight. A fringe detail that shows the professional pride of the scribes. Historians still argue whether the scribe's high social status was a direct result of his essential skills, or if it was a reflection of the fact that he was a sort of intellectual, a person who lived in the world of ideas rather than the world of physical labor. The work was peaceful, but it was also a kind of prison, a life spent hunched over a desk, copying the words of others. You finish your day's work, your hand aching and your eyes tired. You've earned a good living, and you have the satisfaction of a job well done, but the knowledge of what you've endured is a heavy weight. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that pen and the endless scrolls will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with printing presses and computers, and for a job that doesn't require you to sacrifice your body for a living. The ache in the scribe's hand has faded, and you're now back in a medieval town. But this time, you're not a part of the crowd. You are a solitary, feared, and paradoxically, a vital member of the community. You are the medieval executioner. But we're going to focus on your unique and often misunderstood community role. You are a social outcast, a pariah, a person who lives on the very fringes of society, but your work is absolutely essential to the social order. Your home is a small, isolated cottage on the outskirts of town, and your only friends are the animals you keep. People give you a wide berth on the street, and they avert their eyes when you pass. The children are told to be good, or the hangman will get you. You are the embodiment of fear, the final word of the law. But your role is more complex than just carrying out death sentences. A mainstream historical fact is that the executioner often had a number of other duties, from disposing of animal carcasses to performing public floggings and brandings. Your work was a kind of a public sanitation, a way of getting rid of things, both living and dead, that no one else wanted to touch. The executioner's tools, a quirky tidbit of history, were often seen as having magical or medicinal properties. The rope from a gallows, a piece of the axe, or a handful of dirt from the grave of a criminal could all be sold for a small fortune. This was a fringe belief, a strange form of superstition that shows how people tried to make sense of a person who was so closely associated with death. Historians still argue whether the executioner's social isolation was a result of his profession or if he was simply a kind of scapegoat, a person who was given all the dirty jobs so that the rest of society could feel clean. The work was vital, but the person who did it was a constant, living reminder of the brutality of the law. You finish your day's work, and the crowd disperses, leaving you alone with the silence. You are a professional, but your profession is a constant source of shame and social ostracism. As you settle in for the night, the memory of that day and the silent, averted eyes of the crowd will be your only company. Be grateful for a world where justice is a little less public and a lot more humane. The fear of the executioner has faded, and you're now in the bustling, noisy streets of ancient Rome. But this time, you're in a quiet side alley, in a small, cluttered office that smells faintly of herbs and something metallic. You are a Roman physician, and your job is to heal the sick, but your methods and your tools are often as strange as the diseases you are trying to cure. In a world with no real understanding of germs or sanitation, your work is a constant mix of trial and error, and a lot of it is just guesswork. Your tools are strange and unsettling, a set of surgical knives, a few hooks, and a jar of leeches. Remember those? Your remedies are a strange mix of the mundane and the truly bizarre. You might prescribe a soothing herb for a fever, or you might recommend a concoction of crushed mice and wine for a stomachache. The work is a constant, quiet struggle against a host of unseen and misunderstood ailments. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman medicine, while building on the knowledge of the Greeks, was still in its infancy. Physicians had a basic understanding of anatomy, but they had no real understanding of how diseases were spread, and their remedies were often based on superstition and folklore. The Roman physician was a professional, but he was also a constant source of speculation and rumor. A quirky tidbit is that some physicians would use a special kind of surgical needle to remove cataracts, a fringe procedure that was as likely to cause blindness as it was to cure it. Historians still argue whether the Roman physician was truly a source of healing, or if he was a kind of spiritual guide, a person who was consulted for their knowledge of herbs and their ability to provide a kind of comfort in a world with no real hope for a cure. The work was a gamble, and the physician's reputation was only as good as his last patient. You finish your day's work, and the last patient, a man with a fever, leaves. You have done all you can, and you are left alone in the quiet of your office, surrounded by your strange tools and your stranger remedies. The knowledge of your own limitations is a heavy weight as you settle in for the night. The memory of that day's work will be your only company. Be grateful for a world with modern medicine and for a job that doesn't require you to literally guess at a person's fate. The last patient has left, and the strange and the quiet world of the Roman physician has faded away. Our journey through the worst jobs in history is coming to an end. We've seen it all. From the slimy world of the leech collector to the brutal world of the gladiator. We've seen jobs that were physically demanding, socially isolating, and just plain disgusting. And we've seen jobs that, for all their strangeness, were vital parts of the society that created them. As you lie here, safe and warm in your bed, I want you to take a moment and think about our journey together. Remember the smell of the tanner's vats, the clamour of the Roman crowd, and the quiet despair of the alchemist. These are not just stories. They are a testament to the resilience and the resourcefulness of the human spirit. They are a reminder that even in the most difficult and disgusting of circumstances, people found a way to survive, to make a living, and to find a small glimmer of dignity in their work. Now, let's slow it down. Just let the images of the past fade away, like a quiet dream. Let the smells and the sounds of our journey recede into the darkness, leaving you in a place of peace and quiet. The memory of the chimney sweeps, the public criers, the Gong Farmers, it all fades away now. All the work, all the fear, all the hardship, it's all just a story now, a long, winding story that has finally come to its end. You are safe, you are warm, and you are here, in the quiet of the night, with nothing to worry about but the gentle hum of your fan and the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing. Just breathe, let your body relax, and let your mind go quiet. You have nothing to do and nowhere to be. Just rest. It's time to sleep now. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.